Okay, the Gemara says, two people will bring a get. The Gemara asks to Shaila, Boy B'nei Shmuel Meravuna. Shnaim Sheviu get. Two people bring a get. Tzrichen shiurim b'fanenu nechtam or not? Do they have to say b'fanenu nechtam or not? So the Gemara says, Ravuna answered him, Amarle ain't tzrichen. Oma ilu yoimru b'fanenu gir shamila mehamni. They don't have to say b'fanenu nechtam because if they would say b'fanenu girsha, of course they would be believed. So therefore, they're not saying b'fanenu nechtam. And the first question everybody asks is, it sounds like from the Gemara that you need a migu over here. Right? That they're only naman, that they're shluchim, and they don't have to say b'fanenu nechtam because they have a migu, because they could have said b'fanenu girsha. Since they're two Eidim, they could have said b'fanenu girsha, and we would have believed them that she's a Megureshes. Therefore, they don't have to say b'fanenu nechtam to validate the get. And for there to be a good gerushin, to believe them that it's a good gerushin, it's a good get, because ma'ilu yoim b'fanenu girsha. And the question is, what do you need a migu for? Two Eidim. You have two Eidim saying the get is that they're shluchim. We know it's not mezuyif. We know that it's not mezuyif. They're saying that the Baal gave it to them. They weren't mezayif it. So you have two Eidim. You have two Eidim saying Eidim. What do you need a migu for? Why does the Gemara say ma'ilu yoim b'fanenu girsha? The Gemara says ain't tzrichim. They don't have to say it. The whole reason why we have to say it according to Rav is because of chashash ziyuf. Maybe it's mezuyif, and they're saying they weren't mezayif. They're saying the Baal gave it to them. It's Eidus. It's much stronger than a migu. Says the Chasam Sofer, no, you can't use Eidus here. Why not? Because they're being made of themselves. They're negei b'Eidus. What are they saying? They're saying that they're shluchim. You want to believe them that it's not mezuyif. They weren't mezayif it. So you'll have to hear from their Eidus that they're the shluchim and they weren't mezayif it. That means they're being made of themselves.
But you worry that the husband, that someone else in the mezayif and gave it to them to bring to. It doesn't mean that they wrote it. It could have been that someone else wrote it and made them shluchim.
Meaning that it's not a Haggadas Eidus on themselves. It's just saying that they got it from the Baal that this get is not mazuyif. That's all they're saying. And the question is like Rafi is saying. It's not that they're... What is the Chasam Sofer saying? First let's go to the Chasam Sofer's teretz. The Chasam Sofer is saying that they're being made on themselves, that they're shluchim, and therefore we can't accept their Eidus. Why not? Because ain't no made a lot, you can't be made on yourself, you're negei b'Eidus. So you need a migu. So Rafi's asking, and really everybody's asking, all the Achronim ask, what do you mean? You don't need to say that you're a shliach. We just have to know a fact that this is not mezuyah. They're not being made of themselves. They're simply saying that there was a Mesiris Haget, Mehabal, to somebody else. Whether it's them or somebody else is irrelevant. All we have to know is that the Baal wrote this get, and it's not mezuyah. And they're saying that the Baal gave over this get to themselves, to somebody else. It's irrelevant whether it's to themselves or somebody else. They don't have to be made that they're the ones that the Baal made into a shliach and that they weren't mezayif. That's not what we want to hear. The objective of the Eidus is that there was a Mesira from the Baal to somebody else is that we have to hear that it's not mezuyif, and that's what we're hearing. Better asked. Let's ask it a little bit better. The Gemara says in Kiddushin, shliach nasa eid. Right? If a person appoints a shliach to Mekadesh a woman, the halacha is that not only could there be a shliach to go and be Mekadesh this woman, they could also act as one of the Eidus on the Kiddushin. Right? Well, the Eidus is that he's handing over Kiddushin to the woman. Aren't they in a gay Eidus? Aren't they testifying themselves? They're the Shliach to be Mekadesh, and at the same time they're an Eidus. They're an Eid. Why don't we ask? And the halacha is, by the way, in Shulchan Aruch, Shliach Nasa Eid. That's how we paskin. We don't say that they're in a gay Eidus. Why not? Because their Eidus is that there's just a Kiddushin. We have to know that there's a Kiddushin. They're saying there's a Kiddushin. Whether they're doing it or somebody else is doing it, whether they're a Shliach, that's not what we want to hear from the Eidus. What we want to hear from the Eidus is Shimu Kadeshes or not? Did a Kiddushin happen here? Yes or no? Yes. So therefore they're not in the Gei Eidus, and that's why Shliach Nasa Eid. For the same reason, why can't they say that the Baal gave over this get, and the get isn't Mezuyif? That's all we need to hear. Whether they're Shluchim or not is irrelevant, so they're not in the Gei Eidus. So again, we're back to the question, why does the Gemara need the Migoy of Ma'ilu Yoimru B'Fanenu Gershom? So, let's take a look at Rashi, that Beis and Beis. The Gemara says, one of the communities in Rabbi and Rava is, Tasuya Beitrei. Two people will bring a get, according to Rava, you do not have to say B'Fanenu Nechtam, B'Fanenu Nechtam. Why not? Says Rashi. Rashi says, Shneim Nasa Shluchim. And I'm skipping to the last four words of Rashi, and Memela Harei Mitzuyin L'Kaimei. They'll always be Mitzuyin L'Kaimei. Meaning, according to Rava, the reason why we have to say B'Fanenu Nechtam is because, Ein Eidem Mitzuyin L'Kaimei. So Rashi is saying, when two people bring the get, they're Mitzvah L'Kaimai. Whenever the Baal will be Ma'arer eventually, down the line, they'll be Mitzvah L'Kaimai, you'll be Mekayim. So therefore you don't need the Fun and Nechtam. Taisvus asks two strong questions. Taisvus asks, first of all, Atu b'kippatol lahu. What do you mean? Who says that in 2 months from now, when the Baal decides to show up and is Ma'arer, who says that in 2 months from now they'll still be around to be Mekayim this get? That's number one. Number two is, why does the Gemara say Asui Beitrei? Kach shavim shnayim and ashok. The Gemara could have given an example of a shliach who brings a get. He doesn't have to say b'fan nechtam. If there are two people in the shuk who are makar these chasimas and are eventually going to be able to be mekayim the chasimas, according to Ravi, you don't have to say b'fan nechtam. Why does it have to be specifically in the case of Asuya Beitrei? Two people bring, they're both shluchim and they bring this get. Right? It could have been an example of Shnayim and Ashuk who are makar the chasimas, and eventually you'll have kiyum. When the Baal be married, you'll have kiyum. Why, according to Rashi, does it have to be specifically that case?
The thing rather, Einedim would see in the Congo. So it's a very good reason why it has to be these people, because you can't find Shnayim and Ashuk.
But the Gemara could have said that the nafkamina is if, let's say, you know that there's Shnayim and Ashuk who know and are makar these chasimas.
Why would you say that when you can just say Dasuya Beitrei?
Right. And why would you say Suya Beitrei if you could just say that?
Because it's easier. Then
why is it easier? Anyways, we're speaking a hypothetical case. The Baal sent two people. Taisa says, why are we limiting it to this case? You're saying Enechanami. You're answering Enechanami. The Gemara could have given that case as well.
Basically, yeah.
Basically, okay. Taisa didn't want to say that for some reason. Taisa feels like it's limiting. The Gemara could have said both. Yeah.
Because Taisa's basically asking why couldn't he just said the shtar had kiyum already? He's just saying in a way which is already easier. As he's saying, you'll make a very specific case, Asui Beitrei, but really what the ikka here is kiyum. So we're saying Shtam and Ashur because that means the easiest way of getting just.
Because you'll eventually be able to.
It's not about the Aiden, it's the Kiyum. I mean, I
right. In other words, as long as we know that we'll have a form of Kiyum down the line with the Baal B'Ma'arer, that should be enough. Why do we need that Asuya Beitrei? And Rashi always stresses, by the way, if you look at Rashi always stresses, Asuya Beitrei means Shneiam Nasu Shluchim. They're both Shluchim. They both have to be in the Smana from the Baal as a Shliach. Why do you need a Minu Shlichas where both people and they both bring the get as Shluchim? Just say more simpler case. Perhaps it's a more simpler case. Some people are minashuk. They know that they happen to know the chasimas. Then you'll have kiyum. That's Taisus asking two questions on Rashi. The Rosh adds another two questions. The Rosh says, according to Rashi, what does a Suya Beitrei mean? Suya Beitrei means that down the line they'll be around, and when the Baal is married, they'll be mekayim to get. So the Rosh says, for that to happen, they have to be makar the chasimas. They have to know. Have to recognize the chasimas and the shtar in order to be mekayim later on. Never is it mentioned in the Gemara that the Asui Beitrei they're makar the chasimas. The Gemara failed to mention a very important nekuda. They have to be makar the chasimas. That's a third question on Rashi the Rosh asks. And number 4, the second question of the Rosh, which is 4 questions so far, 2 questions of Taisa, the second question of the Rosh, is why does the Gemara, our Gemara, say the reason why they're naman is because of a migui of ma'ilu yoynu b'fneinu girsha. If the reason why they don't say f'nechtam is because down the line they'll be around to be mekayim the get, and that's it. Why do you need a migu for? So the Rosh asks this kasha. But he asks it on Rashi, he doesn't ask it himself, we'll see why soon. But on Rashi, again, Rashi learns that Shnayim Sheviu get means the reason why you don't say Nechtam is because they will be around to be mekayim. The reason why initially they're Masakin b'fan Nechtam is because Einei Demetzuyin L'Kayim, they will be around later on to be mekayim. That's how Rashi learns, understands the Suya Beitrei. And on that we have 4 questions. Number 1, will they always be around? Who says they'll be around when the Baal is finally ma'ara later on? Number 2, Kach Shavim Shnayim and Ashuk. The Gemara could have given an example where you happen to find 2 people that recognize these signatures. It doesn't have to be that they brought these signatures with Torah Shlichus. And number 3, it doesn't say anywhere that they're makar the chasimas. It says that the Asuya Beitrei, they brought the get. Who says they're makar the chasimas and they'll be able to be mekayim the get later on? And number 4, if the reason why you don't have to say for Nechtam is because later on they'll be mekayim the get, so why do we need Ma'ilu Yoyim Fneinu Girsha, Sevar of Amigu? Okay, 4 questions on Rashi. Now, we're lucky. One of the questions Rashi himself asks. Rashi himself asks on himself. One of the questions. The second question of Tosfos of Kach Shavim Shnayim and Ashuk, Rashi Daf Tezayin of Beis asks on himself. Rashi says, V'i Kasha. He asks it slightly different. V'i Kasha. Keep the Soif Shnayim Hein. Right, it's in the middle of the Rashi, like the last wide line. V'ikash, on the top Rashi. V'ikash. Kivin the soif. Shnayim and mali shnayim shluchim, mali echad man. Why do both have to be shluchim? Harei edem etzur l'kaimai. Why do they both have to be shluchim? So Rashi doesn't ask it the way Taisus is asking. Taisus was asking because you could have said that the place where you brought it, you know that two people recognize those signatures. Rashi doesn't ask it that way. Rashi says, why do you need Asui B'Trei that both were the smana, as shluchim? From the Baal, you could have just said that one person is a shliach and the other person is not a shliach, but he happens to recognize the signature. So Rashi says, no, it's not a kasha. Loi plug rabbanon meiboam b'chaburas anoshim b'lo yechidi. Loi plug. So why? Loi plug rabbanon, meaning, you hear what Rashi's saying? Meaning, even if you'll have a form of kiyum down the line, you'll know that later on when the Baal be ma'arer, you'll have kiyum because there's a shliach who knows the signature and also there's somebody else. Yet Rashi says, Loi plug rabbanon. Loi plug, once they're misakim b'fon nechtam, you've got to say it and that's it. So why shnayim, shluchim, if they're both shluchim, why is that different? So Rashi says, the svara. Rashi says, Aval k'sheshnayim nevi'u, milsa the mochacha v'le shchichi v'le achmer barabanan. Something which is shnayim shluchim, vir le achmer barabanan. You say loi plug any other case. But when they're both nisman and shluchim, they're le achmer barabanan because it's a milsa le shchicha, you don't say loi plug on that, and therefore they're potter from saying b'fon nechtam. So Rashi himself, this would be a teretz for Taisus' second kash. Taisus says, Mali the Asui B'Trei, Mali Shnayim and Ashuk that recognize the signatures. And Rashi explains, Rashi says, Shnayim and Ashuk recognizing the signatures, and Echanami, you'll have a form of kiyum later on with the Baal's Ma'ara, because two people in the other town, or the other Medina where you brought the get to, know the signatures. But Loi Plug Rabbanu, the Rabbanu weren't Mechalik. But when two people are Nismana as a Shliach from the Baal, and they're the ones bringing B'Torah as Shlichos, that's a Mosad Leishchicha. Mosad Leishchicha La'achim B'Rabbanu. That's Rashi himself is actually really close to second kasha. But if you take a look at Rashi, it's unbelievable. The Rishonim, when they ask something on Rashi, right, you'll be medayik in the words of Tosfos, and you'll be medayik in the words of the Rosh. They're making assumptions in Rashi, assuming Rashi said something, which if you look inside Rashi, you'll realize Rashi never said those words. Let's take Tosfos' first kasha, Beis and Beis. Tosfos asks, V'kosha. Taisus the Ramas Lasui B'Trei. Taisus says, V'kosha. The Otu B'kipu Tolu. I'm sorry, beforehand. Pirsha Kuntras. Yeah? Look how he quotes Rashi. Amazing. He quotes Rashi in words that Rashi never said and therefore has a kasha. Yeah? Take a look. Rashi, Taisus says, Pirsha Kuntras. L'man do'amr l'f'she'en tu l'kaimu elu yikaimu. They will be mekayim it. Now, if you could find me those words in Rashi, then I understand why Taisus is asking Akash. But if you look in Rashi, Rashi never says that Dasui B'Trei means that Elu Yikaimu. Rashi doesn't say those words. Rashi says that if you have Shneim, Shnasu Shluchim, Rashi says, Harei Hei Mitsuyin L'Kaimu. Major difference. Rashi doesn't say Elu Yikaimu. Rashi doesn't say that they will be the ones to be Mekayim. Rashi says, Mitsuyin L'Kaimu. We'll get there in a second. Another kasha that Rosh asks. The Rosh says, according to Rashi, they'll be Mekayim, so they'll have to be Makirin, the Chasimus. Otherwise, how can do Kiyum later on? They'll have to know the Chasimus, recognize the signatures. Right? So the Rosh says, the Gemara doesn't say they have to be Makirin. Well, I've got news for you. Rashi doesn't say that either. The Rosh is assuming that Rashi requires for these two Shluchim to be Makir the Chasimus, so they could be doing Kiyum later on. If you look in Rashi, Rashi never mentions that they have to be Makir the Chasimus. Not a word mentioned in Rashi. And really, if you look carefully in Rashi, Adarabah, it's mashma from Rashi, they don't have to be Makir the Chasimus. Take a look at Rashi after Zayin at Beis. In that Rashi says, Rashi says something unbelievable. The reason why a Chaburas Anashim have to say B'fon Nechtam is because Loi Plug. But without the Svar of Loi Plug, without the answer of Loi Plug, they wouldn't have to say B'fon Nechtam. Does it say they're Makirin? Boin Chaburas Anashim. They're just coming from that town that the Baal was sending the get. They're not Makirin. Rashi doesn't say that they have to be Makirin. It's Mashma from Rashi, Boin and Chaburas Anashim alone. If not for the Svar of Loi Plug, wouldn't have to say B'fon Nechtam. Amazing. So really, the first kasha of Taisus of Otu B'Kippah Tolu is only based on Taisus Anocha that Rashi meant Elu Yikaimuhu. But we just proved from Rashi. Rashi never said those words. Rashi said something else. Different lashon. Harei Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. And the other thing the Rashi asks is, they have to be makirin. The Gemara never mentions they have to be makirin. We see from Rashi that they don't have to be makirin. Rashi never mentions they have to be makirin. And if anything, Rashi is just saying, all you need is chaburas anoshim in order for them to not to say before the nechtam. So unbelievable. Both places, Daf Tezayin Amud Beis and Daf Beis Amud Beis, when Rashi says the Ptur of the Asui Betrei, the reason why two people who bring a get don't have to say before nechtam is because Rashi says the words Harei He Mitzuyin L'Kaimai, because they're Mitzuyin L'Kaimai. What does Rashi mean? So let me ask you a question. According to Rava, if a person brings a get, Ba'oisa Medina B'Medina Sayam, the same Medina, do they have to say before nechtam? Of course not. Eidim Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. The takana was never said in a place where it's Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. The takana was only miskan in a place where it's not Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. Right? So Rashi is saying something so beautiful. Rashi is saying that when two people bring a get from Medina Sayam, right, it's Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. Regardless whether they're makir the chasimas, regardless whether they'll stick around later on, it's considered Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. When it's Ba'isa Medina B'Medina Sayam, right? Do we know 1,000% that we'll be able to find Kiyam, two people that recognize the signatures of these Eidim signed on the get? No, we don't know. Logic dictates that if it's in the same Medina, there's a possibility for Kiyam. That's what Mitzuyim L'Kaimai means. Mitzuyim L'Kaimai means that there's a possibility for Kiyam. According to Rava says, Ba'isa Medina B'Medina Sayam, we have to have reserved two Eidim that eventually could be Mekayim the get with the Balas Ma'ar. Never said that. Right? Mitzuyim L'Kaimai, all Mitzuyim L'Kaimai means is we have to have a logical explanation of how we are going to protect this woman with the Balas Ma'ar. That's what Mitzuyim L'Kaimai means. Says Rashi, if you have two people coming from Medina Sayam with this get, or if you have a Chaburas Anoshim, that's Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. That's like giving a get Ba'oisa Medina B'Medina Sayam. Regardless whether they're Makir or the Chasimis, regardless whether they stick around later on and if they're going to be Mekayim or not, that's not our issue. Because they are coming from a place in a city where the Baal sent the get from, so there's a logical possibility that there will be Eidim that are going to be Mekayim this get if the Baal is Ma'arim. That's considered Mitzuyim L'Kaimai, just like a person brings a get, Medina Sayam. That's what Rashi means. So therefore, the first kasha tells you that Eilu Yikaimu. Rashi never said that, and Rashi doesn't require that. All Rashi is saying is you need Mitzuyim L'Kaimai, and you have Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. It doesn't mean that they have to be around here to be Mekayim this get later on. And the Rosh Kasha Makirin, Rashi doesn't say they have to be Makirin the Chasimas, because Rashi doesn't learn that the heter of Asuyi Beitrei is because we're protected and we know that we're going to have Kiyam later on. All we need is Mitzuyim L'Kaimai, a possibility that if the Baal is Ma'arer, we have a logical possibility of how to explain how we're going to protect this woman. And that we have. If you know that there are two people coming from Medina Ziyam or Chaburas Anoshim, then we have that possibility, just like we have this possibility, but Medina Ziyam, and for that reason we don't have to say from Nechtam over there. Yes?
But if they're not Makir in the signatures, then how are they going to do Kiyam? You lose that logical explanation of how you could potentially Mekayim the Shah.
Right, but is it a possibility that they will be able to be Makir the Chazimas? As long as we have a possibility of Kiyam, a logical possibility of Kiyam, then that's like Ba'is Medina. Let me ask you a question, Daniel. Ba'is Medina Medina Ziyam. Right? How do we know whether people are going to be Makir the Chasimas and they're going to be Eidim Mitzuyim L'Kaimai? The answer is we don't. Yet, we don't say B'fan Nechtam. Why not? Because logically, if you're giving it in that city, then it's considered Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. Mitzuyim L'Kaimai means that there has to be a logical explanation of how we're going to protect this woman. When two Eidim come with a get from Medina Sayyam, that's enough of an explanation to protect this woman, to say, well, right now we have somehow, some way that we can protect this woman. That's considered Mitzuyim L'Kaimai. And therefore, it doesn't mean Eilu Yikaimu. That's the Teretz for Taisa's first kasha. Yes?
So isn't that based on the ability to find people? So that doesn't get rid of the problem. If they're not here, then just because they were there, it's not like a random thing. It's based on the ability to find people. So if there's two people and they're not there anymore,
The same verse with him is also not there. You
Not worried.
Right,
No,
we don't need a 100% insurance that we're going to have Adam.
But these are two people
There's
who could be in the middle of
a
nowhere.
chance that someone will come. You don't know.
But as in Bo's Medina, I understand, because you're saying you can find people here, there, and everywhere.
We don't like it. No, you hear a chiluk. It's definitely a chiluk. No, so but Rashi learns that that's enough of a Matsuyin L'Kaimai not to require before an Nechta. Meaning, so let's go a step deeper. I just want to mention one thing. So Rashi is saying, what Rashi is really saying, is that just like Ba'isa Medina B'Medina Sayyam, we have Eidim Matsuyin L'Kaimai, right? So in Chazal were never misaken the takana before nechta Ba'isa Medina B'Medina Sayyam because it's Matsuyin L'Kaimai. The takana is only said in a place where it's not Matsuyin L'Kaimai. Hu Hadin, Rashi says, is that when you have a Chaburas Anoshim coming from that place, or you have Shneim Shluchim coming from that place, Chazal were never misaken that takana ba'oifen where Suyi Beitrei or Shnaim Sheviu. Because that's Matsuyin L'Kaimai. In a place where it's Matsuyin L'Kaimai, Chazal were never misaken the takana before nechta. That's Rashi. Now Tosfos doesn't learn like this, obviously. Tosfos is asking a kasha, Eli Kaimu. So how does Tosfos understand Rashi? Tosfos is asking it on Rashi. How does Tosfos understand Rashi? Tosfos understands Rashi to mean that Asuyi Beitrei is a kiyum of the takana of B'fana Nechta. Tosfos is saying, why were they misaken B'fana Nechta to begin with? Because we're choishish for the Ira Baal, right? We misalik the Ira Baal. The Baal might come and be Ma'arer, but we have to misalik the Ira Baal. Zuk Tosfos, if we have two people that are going to bring this get, and they'll stick around, right? They'll stick around till later, right? And they'll be makar the chasimas and everything. So that's a kiyum of the takana. The takana of Nechta requires that there should be a protection for this woman, that if there's an ira habal, we should have kiyum. So Asui Beitroy, you have kiyum. You have mezumon l'kaimo. You have an oifen of how to protect this woman. So it's a kiyum of the takana. It's a kiyum of the takana for Nechta. Just like for Nechta protects the woman, that in case a future ira habal, you'll have a kiyum. Who adin when you have a Asui Beitroy, two people bring a get, you'll have them mezumon l'kaimo. You'll have a kiyum. So in Lumdus, there's a major chilik in our community between Rashi and Tosfos how to understand the hektar of a Asui Beitroy. Rashi understands the Asui Beitroy means that since that's considered Mitzuyin L'Kaimai, Chazal were never Mesaken Takana Ba'if Met Mitzuyin L'Kaimai. Whereas Tosfos learns, no, but for the Nechta means that you have some sort of protection available if there's an Ira Baal, you have a Kiyum. Shnaim Sheviu get, Elu Yikaimu, you'll have that protection then. So that's a Kiyum of for the Nechta. It's not that the word Mesaken it then, but you have a Kiyum, that which before the Nechta gives us, that you have even when two people bring a get, although they're not saying before nechtam, because we have the insurance that they're mezumon l'kaimai, that's enough of a kiyum of the takana of a nechtam.
How do you know that Tosfos holds that? He thinks that's what Rashi holds. He doesn't necessarily hold that. He just thinks that's what Rashi holds.
Right. Tosfos doesn't hold that. I mean that Tosfos. This is how Tosfos learned in Rashi. Correct. Right. Now, and that's why Tosfos asks, what do you mean? Oto b'kippatol, when Tosfos learns that Shnaim Sheviu get, the reason why you don't say for nechtam is because that's a kiyum of the takana, because they'll be around. And Tosfos asks, the way he understands Rashi, Oto b'kippatol, or kach shavim Shnaim and ashuk, you have the same insurance when two people are makir the chazimas, or the Rosh Kasha, they'll have to be makirin. It doesn't say anywhere in the Gemara that they have to be makirin the chazimas. That's because they understood Rashi to mean that Shnaim Sheviu get, the Havana is that that's a kiyum of the takana for nechta. Just like for nechta protects the woman because you have a kiyum, so too Shnaim Sheviu get protects the woman because you will have a kiyum later on when the Baal is ma'arer. So therefore they had all these kashas. But the way we understood Rashi, the way we explained Rashi is not saying that Shnaim Sheviu get means that they will be mekayim it, and that's a kiyum of the takana. B'chalal not. Rashi is just saying that's considered mitzuyin l'kaimai. The takana was never said b'kai gavna.
If we understood the Mishnah, we have the fourth question with the Rosh.
Oh, we'll get there right now. What's the fourth question of the Rosh? So far we answered all three first questions. So, let's go a step deeper. Why can't Rashi learn like Tosfos? Why didn't Rashi really learn like the Avon of Tosfos? Right, again, we're saying Tosfos understood in Rashi that Shnaim Sheviu get means that they'll stick around later on, and there will be a kiyum of the takana of a nechta by them sticking around and having an available kiyum later on with the Baal's ma'arer. Why didn't Rashi learn like that? It's an amazing thing. Yesh lachkar, the achronim kolay v'schakirim. When Chazal were matzir b'fana nechtam, what did they do? Exactly what did they do? Pashtus, before they were matzir b'fana nechtam, they weren't chayshish for ziyuf. There's no real chashash ziyuf on a get. There's no real chashash ziyuf on the get. Because maybe you get the Eretz Yisroel, right? In Eretz Yisroel, you don't need b'fanei for the necht, but she can get married without kiyum. So there's no real chashash ziyuf on the get. Right? The Mishnah says that maybe get Eretz Yisroel, there's no b'fanei for the necht, there's no kiyum at all, she can get married. So there's no real chashash ziyuf. If there were a real chashash ziyuf, she wouldn't be allowed to get married. So why is she allowed to get married? Because there's no real chashash ziyuf. Why not? Tosfos says because mishnah niguna kilu barabanan. There are different pshatim in the Rishonim why there's no real chashash ziyuf. But bottom line is there's no real chashash ziyuf. Chazal said we have to say b'fanei nechtam for the nechtam. The question is, why do you have to say b'fanei for the nechtam? Because the Baal can be ma'ar later on. We want to be misalik the ur Baal. But now, once they said that we require kiyum, the question is, what was the gather of that takana? Did they treat the get again like a mezuyif to get that were choishish for ziyuf? Or they just said listen, for ziyuf we're anyways not choishish. For whatever reason the Rishonim explain, because mishneguna kila barabana, whatever it is, we're not choishish for ziyuf. When Chazal required b'fanei nechtam for the nechtam, all they required was a protection for the woman. That if the Baal's ma'ar, she should be protected. But they weren't choishish now for ziyuf until there's a b'fanei nechtam for the nechtam. That wasn't the gather of the takana. That they're going to be matzich b'fanei nechtam for the nechtam, and they're going to treat it like a get mezuyif until we have kiyum. That's pashtus. There's a raya from Rashi in the Daf days. Rashi learned that once we were matzruch, once Chazal were misaken at the kind of nechtam, they treated the get like it's a get mezuyif, like every other star. Meaning, they said it's mezuyif, and therefore make sure you're mekayim this get. Why did they say you need kiyum? Because the ira Baal. But once they required, that was the sibas atakana. That's why we required kiyum. But once they required kiyum, the get atakana was that we treat it like a get mezuyif until you have kiyum. What's the raya? Just quickly, Rashi says, the Gemara says later on that according to Reb Meir, maybe get Medina sayam v'nafs nelav v'loy omar lav v'fanei nechtam for nechtam. He didn't say v'fanei for nechtam. The Gemara says according to Reb Meir, Yoitzi v'avlad mamzer. She has to get divorced if she had a child. Avlad mamzer. The Gemara says, Reb Meir ishim d'loy omar, because you don't say v'fanei for nechtam. Yoitzi v'avlad mamzer. Come on, it's the Kana de Rabbanon. It's not a derais over here. So Meir learns if you weren't the kind of Takana de Rabbanon, Yoitziv Avlad Mamzer. And Rashi says a very interesting thing on the Kasha. Rashi says, Befon of Nechtav. What does Rashi mean, Befon of Nechtav? Says the Pnei Yeshua. The guy said Befon Nechtav later on. So he didn't say it B'Shas the Messina. Nosna la v'lo yom ala Befon Nechtav. But he said it later on. So we know that it's a good get. There's a kiyum on this get. So why should the Vlad be a Mamzer? Just because he didn't say it B'Shas the Messina, V'nosna v'lo yom ala, that's why the Vlad should be a Mamzer, but he said it later on. Says the Pnei Yeshua, a very thing. It's a mashma from Rashi. If he didn't say before Nechtam later on, the Gemara wouldn't have a kasha. Rashi is explaining the Gemara's kasha because eventually he said before Nechtam, so you know it's Mekuyim. But it's mashma from Rashi. Had he not said before Nechtam later on, the Gemara wouldn't have a kasha in Rebbeinu. The Gemara would understand why the Vlad is a Mamzer. Yoitziv Vlad Mamzer. It's Meduyik in Rashi. That if Rashi learned that without the nechtam, we understand why Yotziv Avlad Mamzer, the Rashi treated this get like a get mezuyif. And that's why it's Yotziv Avlad Mamzer. Otherwise, why should it be Yotziv Avlad Mamzer? Even without the nechtam, if we're never chayshish mezuyif, even if it didn't say nechtam, so why should Yotziv Avlad Mamzer? So it's before from that Rashi understood the get of Takana was, once they said you need the nechtam, what they said was that we're going to treat it like a get mezuyif, we're going to be chayshish mezuyif on this get like every other star, until we have the nechtam. So again, the sibus at the corner from the nechtam is irabal. Chazal said we need the nechtam because we're afraid that there's going to be irabal. But once they required the nechtam, what did they do? They said now that gather at takana will be matzrich kiyum like every other star, will be chayshish v'ziyif like every other star. If that's true, that according to Rashi, we're chayshish v'ziyif on a get, which is not mekuyim, right? So when the shluchim are bringing a get, shnaim sheviu get, right? So when they're saying that we are shluchim, what are they being made on? They have to be made that it's not mezuyif. They have to be made that it's not mezuyif. We are chayshish, when somebody brings a get, we are chayshish that it's mezuyif unless proven otherwise. So if they have to prove that it's not mezuyif, so they have to say that they're the ones shluchim, they're the ones bringing it. How are they going to prove that it's not mezuyif? They have to be made that they got it, that they're shluchim. How else are they going to prove that it's not mezuyif? How do they know? So they have to be made of their shluchim. So they're being made of themselves. They're going to be made of themselves. So Mamela, if they're going to be made of themselves at their shluchim, because that's the only way we'll know that it's not mezuyif, that's Agodis, Edus, Alatzman. So therefore, you need a migui. So what's a migu going to help you? If we think it's mezuyif, what's a migu going to help you? The migu is going to tell us that they're shluchim. Once we know they're shluchim, then Rashi Daf Tezayin Odbei says that if two shluchim bring a get, it's a milsad le'shchicha, and the kai gavner le'gozru b'rabbanon. Rabbanon were never geyser. They're never misakim b'far nechtam. Once they're never misakim b'far nechtam on such a get, so then we're not choshesh ziyaf anymore. The whole chashash ziyaf is because they're misakim b'far nechtam. And once they're misakim b'far nechtam, we're treated like a get mezuyaf until proven otherwise. But once they're believed through a migu that they're shluchim, so all of a sudden now, the chashash ziyah falls away because it's a milsad le'shchicha, and in the milsad le'shchicha, le'tiknu rabbanan b'far, which means that we're not choshesh ziyah either. So according to Rashi will have to learn, because Rashi understands that the get of Takana for Nechtam was that we treat the get like it's a get mezuyif, unless it's mekuyim. So Rashi will have to learn that when Shnaim Sheviu get, that two people bring a get, and they're saying that we are shluchim, in essence what they have to be saying is that it's not mezuyif, because we're really choshesh b'ziyuf. So how are we going to be mekayim? How are we going to know that it's not mezuyif? They have to say we are the ones that brought the get. We know that it's not mezuyif because the Baal made us into shluchim. That's what I'm going to say to the Latzman. So according to Rashi, you need a migui of ma'ilu yoyim afeinu girsha. And what's the migui going to do for you? The migui is going to give them an amonas that they're shluchim, and once they're shluchim, then the chashash ziyah falls away because there's no b'far nechtam, there's no takana b'far nechtam anymore. Like Rashi Daf Tezayin Odbei says. So that would answer the Rosh's fourth kasha on Rashi.
Can we pass on the chomim against Rameir? So I can Rashi Pshat like Rameir.
We do pass on the chomim. So you want to know, could you bring a raya from that Rameir?
So I can say Rashi learns Pshat in this whole thing, according to Rameir, and we don't pass on that.
Okay, so we'll get to that Gemara in the famous days. It's a good question. We'll get to the Gemara in the famous days and we'll understand that. But according to Tosfos says that Shnaim Sheviu get, the reason why they don't say Fanef is because they say that Abal Sholcham. They say that Abal Sholcham. According to Tosfos understands that the Takana Fanef wasn't Matzrich that we're Choshesh B'ziyif on this get. Tosfos learns that Fanef the whole Takana Fanef is only that to misalik the Abal of later on. Right? That's all we need. So Tosfos says, so they can be believed to say that they're shluchim. They don't have to. We're not really choshesh b'ziyuf. The entire b'far nechtam is not because we're choshesh b'ziyuf. That wasn't the gather of Takana according to Tosfos. According to Tosfos, the reason why we need b'far nechtam is because to be misalik the Abal of later on. So when they're saying that Abal shulcham, what we are hearing from them is not that they have a Torah shliach. That's not what we need to know. All we need to know is that the Baal wasn't mezayefet. That wasn't mezuyif. The Baal shouldn't be able to complain that it's mezuyif. For that, there can be naman. So therefore, Tosfos says that Shnaim Sheviu get, then Amonis is that Habal Shulcham. So then you'll ask, if according to Tosfos they are naman to be meyed Habal Shulcham, so according to Tosfos, why do you need a migui in Bafayim Aleph? If according to Tosfos it is Agod to say this, it's not like the Chazon Yisroel says that they're being made a latzman and they can't say Eidos. According to Tosfos, it's a real Eidos because they're not being made a latzman. They're not being made that they have a Torah shliach. All they're saying is Habal Masram, Habal Shulcham. So why do you need a Ma'ilu Yoyim B'fneinu Girsha? According to Tosfos. So it's an amazing Maram Shif, and we'll finish with that. Maram Shif says that the Abaye of Shmuel Meravuna, of Shnaim Sheviu get, whether it's Tzricha Sheyom B'fneinu Nechtav or not, says the Maram Shif, wasn't whether we're choishish that the get is mezuyif. Right? And since you have to wait in bringing the get, so we're not choishish the get is mezuyif anymore. Because they're saying that Abal Shulchan. It was much more than that. The Shiloh of the Gemara was, let's be choishish that the Baal was mezayif before he gave it over to the Shulchan. And that's why, and for that, the Eidus of Abal Shulchan won't help anymore. Abal Shulchan means that once the Baal gave it over, we saw the Baal gave it over and nobody was mezayif. The Baal was the one that wrote it. But the Gemara Shiloh was much more than that. Let's be choishish that before the Baal handed over this get to these two Eidim, He was Mezayifit. What does it mean he was Mezayifit? He was never Machtem relayed him. He was the one that forged the signatures. And that was the Shaila of the Gemara. And for that, their Eidus of a Baal Shulchan won't help you. That was the Gemara Shaila.
Surely then they wouldn't be able to say b'fnei nechtam.
No, so for that reason, the Gemara asks, perhaps we should be matzrich them to say b'fnei nechtam, la'afuki, that chashash. So that we shouldn't be choishish if the Baal was the one that forged the signatures. They should be required to say b'fnei nechtam. That was the Gemara Shaila. A new chashash. In other words, of course, habal shulchan that you have edus for, but it's a new chashash. Perhaps the Baal himself was forging the signatures before he handed it over to the Eidim. And for that, says the Gemara, we don't have such a chashash. You know why? You know what that means? Ma'al Yifnei Gershon means, what would be in a regular case of Gershon? Right? Two Eidim watch a Baal hand over a get to a woman, to a Isha. Do we have a chashash that the Baal forged the signatures before he gave it over to the Isha? No. It's a classic case of Gershon. The Baal comes in front of two Eidim Mesira. He gives over a get to this woman. We're not choishish perhaps the Baal forged the signatures beforehand. So says the Gemara, we wouldn't be choishish for such a chashash. Wadin shnaim shaviu get. We're not choishish for such a chashash. And that's the pshat in the Gemara. Now, if you take a look, mamish brilliant. If you take a look in places that Beis and Beis, take a look inside. Something unbelievable. In place it's clear that he learned the Gemara like that, because Taisus learns that Shnaim Shaviu get, it's an amonis of Eidus. Taisus says, Dasui Betrei Taisus says, Oimer in Farshi Vod, Dasui Betrei Amish Abal Shulchan, Desulan Emelim L'Shalachtem. Right? Doch Yom L'Kamon. Umayim of the Gershon, Milam Emil, Lahai Loichashtin Shanechtem Beveis Dein Psulim, Bestam Kivish Noch Leget, Kedin also Dein Chosh Lach Shila. Taisus says exactly this case, that Umayim Yom of the Gershon, we're not going to be choishish. Every case of Gerushin, when the Baal gives it over to the Isha, then maybe the Baal was Messiah for himself beforehand. Right? Because they ain't a chashash lachshila. So just like in a regular case of Gerushin, when two Eidim will be made that they saw the Baal handed over to the woman, we're not going to be chashish that perhaps the Baal was Messiah for beforehand, because they ain't a chashash lachshila. Who would then when Shnaim Shaviu get? We're not going to be chashish for that either. So basically, it's a very fundamental machlokes Rashi tells us on how to learn this Gemara. Rashi learns that Ma'il Yifnei Gershon is Mecham Migui, and we explained the reason why you need a Migui and they can't be the Nemonim, the Torah's Eidos, is because according to Rashi, they have to be made of themselves because they're real Chashash Ziyafir, and they have to be made of themselves in order to take away the Chashash Ziyafir. They have to say that they're the Shluchim, they're the ones that got it from the Baal, so they're being made of themselves. So because Gavna being of themselves, they're not Neman, so you need a Migui. And we said, once you have the Migui, the Neman with the Migui, that they're a Shliach, then for that you don't need any more for nechtam because they weren't misakim the kagam for nechtam because it's mitzuyin l'kaimah. It's a big vart. I'll tell you nafminu la'alacha right now. According to Rashi, Shnaim Shaviu get the reason why you don't say for nechtam is because the kagam they weren't misakim the takana for nechtam because that's considered mitzuyin l'kaimah. That's not what the takana was said. According to Taisus, no, of course they're misakim the takana. And the reason why Shnaim Shaviu get in its richin is because you have a kiyum because they're the ones saying habal shulcham and they're neman on that. They're nemitz Baal Shulchan because according to Taisus, there's no real chashash ziyuv. They don't have to be made in themselves. There's just a hechetimtzi of being misalik the Ira Baal. Habal Shulchan is misalik the Ira Baal. That's according to Taisus. So in Mele, according to Taisus, Shnaim Shaviu get. They're saying Habal Shulchan you have kiyum, and according to Rashi, you don't need kiyum. Shnaim Shaviu get since they're shluchim. It's a muslim shchicha. The kai gamna the Rabbanan weren't misakim kiyum. A major nafkamina la'alacha. The Tur says, what if two people bring a get? Shnaim Shaviu get, right? And the Baal is ma'ara later on. Do we need kiyum now or not? Torah says you need kiyum. The Beis Shmuel, the Bach, they go nuts. What do you need kiyum? You had Shnaim Shaviu get, they said a Baal Shulchan. Right? So what do you kiyum for? The answer is, if you learn like Rashi, you never had kiyum. Shnaim Shaviu get, all Shnaim Shaviu get told us is that the Kaigam le tiknu rabbanim b'fon nechtam. Once you have two shluchim bringing a get, they're not nemat to say that it's not mezuyif because we have a real chashash over here. They're not nemat, but there's edus to say that it's not mezuyif. Why not? Because they're being made on themselves. So you don't have a kiyum over here. So why don't you say for nechtam? Because the kaigavna where two people are nismana b'tayv shliach to bring a get, like tiknu rabbanon. It's a muslim shliach la'achma b'rabbanon. So now the Baal be ma'ar later on, of course you'll need kiyum. That'll be the answer to the Torah. But according to Taisvus, According to Taisus, that it's a Torah's Eidus. Shnaim Shavim get their Nema to say that Torah's Eidus, a Baal Shulchan. So that's already a Kiyum. There's no real Chashash here. It's only to Misalik the Ura Baal. And you have that God to say this to Misalik the Ura Baal. Okay, fantastic. Good to know.